Welcome. We're going to start the interview now. Jeff Ames. I'm Michael Kabongo. First question, pretty simple. How did you decide on history as your area of study?
Well, when I was growing up in Saugus, that was during the time of the bicentennial celebration. I got involved with the local town organization, the West Parish Militia, to reenact some of the Revolutionary War events that happened during the bicentennial years. But my own family has a lot of history in Massachusetts before it ever became Massachusetts. And my own family came from Puritan stock with a little rebellious edge. Part of them became Quakers.
No.
And were somewhat persecuted, moved off, and became part of the Native American population when the local white settlers didn't take to them very well. And the other part stayed pretty loyal to the king and queen until the Revolutionary War time. So there was a little basis of family history that always piqued my interest, and this was a great way for me to get into it. The other practical side of it is I became a teacher not too long ago, about 6-7 years ago, and social studies has always been a favorite topic of mine. And they don't have a master's degree in social studies here, and the closest thing to a social studies topic would have been history.
What area of history did you decide to focus on?
I focused on the history of marginalized people, and it took several different routes. I went through, one of the first courses I had was with Dr. Avi Chomsky, who's written quite extensively on the history of Latin America, and particularly her focus here in Colombia, and the persecution of local people in Colombia by the government and by outside corporations, U.S. corporations that kind of exploit them for their land and their coal and their labor and that kind of thing. So she was my first real exposure to any kind of history that dealt with marginalized people in a very complicated process of the historiography of the areas and all the contributors that brought something to the table. The other piece was, of course, my Native American background. Native Americans have been persecuted since early settlers showed up on the shores of Massachusetts.
A little bit here and there, yeah.
Yeah. So there was already a bit of a lean towards that to begin with. And then from there I had some classes with the department chair, Dr. Moriello, and that focused on Nazi Germany. And I also did a summer travel institute with him and some of the folks from the geography department, Dr. Steve Young, Dr. Steve Matchek, the two Steves as he likes to call them. And it was just interesting. We went to Central Europe, and a lot of those places were affected by the Nazi movement, and then later on by the Soviets after World War II, and it became area under Soviet control. And the Jewish population, the persecution of the Jewish population grabbed my interest, and just really all the religious sites there. One of the most moving events that I had and experienced while I was over there was I took a self-tour. We had days when we could do our own thing. And as a good student, I took a self-tour of the Josefov neighborhood in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And Prague had a thriving Jewish community for hundreds of years, going back to the 1300s, 1200s. And as it moved into, of course, the 1940s, 1930s, 1940s, the Josefov neighborhood came under, unconscionable persecution by the Nazis and Nazi sympathizers. And eventually, most of the people were wiped out, went off to concentration camps. And today, that particular area of Prague stands as an outdoor museum. There's people that live and work in that area, but there's only basically 3,000 Jewish inhabitants in the entire city of Prague now.
That's quite a decline. In studying the different areas, did you notice different trends, different recurrent themes in the persecution?
Yeah, the upholding of the Nazi ideology, also the old prejudices that had been in the region. They really fomented from Germany, turn of the century Germany, the Jewish population was known to have a great reputation as shrewd businessmen. They were also the money handlers in the area. And that set them up for a lot of resentment by others, a lot of jealousy by others. They were just a very talented group of people, and they knew what they were doing. They were business people. They knew how to make a profit. They knew how to run a business, and they were very successful at what they did. One of the other things that contributed probably to some of this resentment was the fact that they started to build the first department stores, which put the little shops and craftsmen sort of at a disadvantage because they were only focused on one product, where the department store could fulfill a lot of needs all at once.
How have you brought some of this learning into your teaching job?
Well, unfortunately, in Massachusetts, we have to follow the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks because of the MCAT test. And it's not a terrible thing, but it does kind of limit a little bit what we bring into the classroom. I teach 7th grade social studies, and at our school, our year is divided up between part geography and history. Making my due date at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot at Parris Island.
Did you have a lot of family who's been in the military, or are you first generation?
No, I have a lot of family that's been in the military. Even my grandfather, who's Sicilian, he was not native-born American. He came to the United States in 1913, just before World War I. He served in the Italian Army as a cavalry soldier, and he was 15, 16 years old. And he also served, I think it's the Italian-Turkish War. He told a few stories about that, but it wasn't a real great time in his life, a lot of hardship. And then my uncles on his side were in the Army. One was able to stay here in the United States. He was doing his doctorate at Northeastern, and he was a research chemist, so they put him in the Army Reserve, and he served that way. The other, his older brother, his brother Mario, was actually drafted into the Army and served at the Battle of the Bulge. And some of the stories that he told me about the Battle of the Bulge were quite hairy. On my father's side of the family, all of his brothers served in the military, and we lost my uncle Leonard actually in Vietnam. And he was a career military man. He had been in the Navy. And after he retired from the Navy, he went into the Merchant Marine and was in Vietnam during the first Tet Offensive. And he was on land. He was trying to get back to his ship. And as they did, they rolled over a sidewalk. The Viet Cong apparently had been in the night before, and they laid wooden landmines down that were very difficult to detect. And they had created some kind of a traffic jam. The Jeep rode up on the sidewalk to get past people, and that was the end of that. And then I've had cousins that have served in Vietnam and that kind of thing. But for my immediate family, I'm the only one now that has served in the military.
Did you get any encouragement from your family? Was there some pushback from your parents?
Not really. Mothers mothers anywhere don't want their kids to go off to do anything, but I didn't listen anyways like I usually did, and I did what I wanted to.
What was the most difficult adjustment getting into the military for you?
I think it was loss of freedom. Being a Yankee, sorta. You're used to being very independent, and it's always been my independence and sometimes my outspokenness, because when something's not working right, I don't mind speaking up about it. That's probably got me in a little hot water. That's probably why I'm still a sergeant now and not wearing any kind of officer bars. But that's okay, because that's me, and I'm still contributing and giving what I can.
Now, you said you were in the Marines earlier, and now you're in the Army. I'm sure there's an interesting story there.
Right. I joined after I came out of boot camp. Unfortunately, they couldn't guarantee my school, so I went to the Marine Reserve so I can come back to college and do some stuff, try to get a degree while I was trying to figure out, okay, what else am I going to do now? So I stayed in the Marine Reserve. I was in the Marine Reserve for close to 10 years. And at the tail end of my Marine Reserve duty, I had hurt my back and really just kind of had to hang it up. The Marines are a very physical team. And I had started off in a pretty physical job. Every Marine is an infantryman to begin with. And those are the skills. Even if your job is running a typewriter, when it comes time to combat, you're going to grab your rifle and you're going to do what a Marine does, and that's fight. Combat is the first mission for a Marine. And I was in what was called Surveillance and Target Acquisition Platoon my first 4 years in the Marine Corps, and we had served as a scout sniper. I wasn't a sniper because I only shot at that time sharpshooter. I wasn't an expert, but still I was an alternate if need be. You can put rounds down range and make them hit what you want. And it was a very physical job. You work in 2-man and 4-man teams. You rappel out of helicopters at night. You go into some hairy areas if need be, and it's physical from the morning, from the time you wake up in the morning till the time you go to sleep at night. And from there I went into military intelligence in the Marine Corps, and from there into S3, which is military operations or combat operations. And it's still a pretty physical job, a little bit more desk time to do operation orders and that kind of thing. But I was helping out, getting the gear back on and doing a practice mission with some folks that had come in. And I actually fell down a little 90-foot cliff and hurt my back. And it wasn't too bad after that. It just laid me up for a couple of weeks. But as I got a little older, so did the back, and I needed to hang it up for a little while. I was holding those folks up. So I took about a 5-year hiatus. And when I was ready to come back, they said, well, you're 32 now. You're a little old for us. Everything has changed. And the door was open to the Army. So it's like, okay, I still know I can contribute. So,
What are you doing in the Army now?
now I'm a chaplain assistant in the Army. Now it's kind of a big change from surveillance and target acquisition platoon, but I'm older. I'm 48 years old. I've been a chaplain assistant since 1997, and it's kind of nice to take a little break and let the young guys do their thing, and older guys like me just kind of sit back and encourage them and support them when they need that.
As a chaplain's assistant, what exactly do you do?
My primary mission as a basic chaplain's assistant is to provide personal security and protection for the unit ministry team. And the unit ministry team on a battalion level, that's where they're all at. There's nothing down lower than that. There's always a chaplain and a chaplain assistant. And since chaplains by Geneva Convention are non-combatants, they don't carry any weapons into war. And they really can't participate in the fighting. So somebody needs to be there to watch their back and make sure that they don't get killed themselves. It's not so much of a chaplain assistant's job to engage the enemy, but to realize the enemy is over there and I got to get the chaplain out of here to make sure that he stays alive. The other thing that a chaplain assistant does depends upon their own personal experience. Where I'm at now, I also provide personal counseling. We do grief support. We provide suicide prevention training, first aid. Some of our chaplain assistants are what they call combat lifesavers, where it's a little bit more involved than just basic first aid. They give IVs and can run a defibrillator and the whole bit. And the people that work on my team, we're pushing for more of that because we want to be utilized in every which way that we can. Especially these days, you don't know what kind of a situation you might find yourself in, and you might be the only medical person available to assist and render aid.
Are there any subsets of the military that you see more often as a chaplain's assistant, or?
You mean like as far as subsets of people, types of people?
Do you see more non-coms? Do you see officers more?
We see them all. When you're working for the chaplain's office, you see everybody that comes in. It doesn't matter what rank they have in their collar. They're just another person when they walk through that door. So we always have a good sample of society that walks through our office doors when they come in.
How does your own faith impact the service you provide?
Well, early on, I've been an ordained clergy person since 1995, and I started out in I don't know what you'd call it, probably a community church type situation, and that didn't really require much education, ecclesiastical education or accredited education. You take the courses and you study, that kind of thing. I guess it would be really closer to like a holiness movement kind of a thing. But I always had my Roman, even though I had left the Roman Catholic Church for other reasons, I always had that tug at the liturgical aspect of religious life and spiritual life, and felt something was missing with just the, pounding on the pulpit and waving the Bible around. So it was nice to find a continuing Anglican group that was a bit more progressive, much like the Episcopal Church, and to make a connection with them. And we have a few more requirements. We're actually a group that's organized, that's recognized by the Department of Defense, and we belong to the International Council of Community Churches all the way up through the World Council of Churches. And we're a very small group. We have a more focused ministry. I don't have to worry about a parish. We do a lot of chaplain type work. Unfortunately, the education that I've done in the past has been state licensed, Department of Education, state licensed work that is not recognized by the military, or else I would have been able to get a commission as a chaplain. So my next adventure starts to do, after this master's degree, since it's all completed, thank goodness, is to focus on becoming a chaplain if my age doesn't get in the way. And the next master's degree will probably be a Master of Arts in Pastoral Theology to meet the requirements.
Do you have chaplains of different faiths?
Absolutely, yeah. We have, I worked for a rabbi chaplain when I was overseas. He wasn't the only chaplain in our command. We had a lot of interesting characters. Chaplains are kind of a duck of a different color, so to speak, because you get the ones that have been prior military and have actually seen combat and know what it is to be a soldier. They were enlisted men before they became chaplains and officers. And those are the real down-to-earth guys, and you know that you're getting a good deal with those folks. And then you get the ones that have not seen anything, that came right out of the church, became an officer right away, and you can definitely tell the quality of the character by where they came from. And that doesn't, that's not a generalization. I don't want to use that as a generalization, but it's a pretty good barometer of where things are at.
What sort of relationship do the combatants and non-combatants in general in the military have?
It depends on what they're doing. Chaplains and their units that they serve have a very close relationship. If the chaplain's a good chaplain and he gets out there, if he's a chaplain for the troops and he's out there batting, for them, very tight, close relationship. Chaplain can also alienate himself from the troops by being a little bit too demanding, by making unreasonable requests to the command, where he becomes kind of a pain in the rear end for everybody. And then that just makes it miserable for everybody else on the team, because immediately, if his chaplain assistant becomes associated with him, which he will because they're in a team, it's like, oh no, here comes the chaplain's,
Yeah.
What
are some of the changes in the military you've seen over your time in?
Excuse me. I think it's been pretty much the discipline. Now, when I was in the Marine Corps, I noticed we did a lot of teamwork. Everything was team. You didn't do anything without your team. You didn't leave anybody behind. And that's just the way it was. If you went out drinking, everybody went out drinking. If you got in trouble, everybody got in trouble. You stuck together. It was a real family. And it's still kind of that way in the Marine Corps. I still have folks that I know that are still in the Marines. And it's still like that. It's gotten a little bit bigger, and it's gotten a little bit more, things rely on technology quite a bit more. So it does take that human element somewhat out of it. The Army was kind of interesting to get used to. It was huge when I first got into the Army, and all these units with different designations. It's like, what are all these numbers? What do they mean? Can't we just keep it simple? You know, it was the KISS principle: keep it simple, soldier. But in the Army, I find that there's not so much of a personal touch. You're really just, you know, you're contributing part of the team and the whole bit, and they play up the team aspect of it as much as they can. But it's really large, and like any corporation, you know, sometimes people's needs don't get met exactly the way they should, or people don't get the attention that they need to take care of administrative problems or other kinds of life issues that happen to come along. And unfortunately, that's why a lot of people get out. But fortunately, the Army is working on that and is actually becoming better and better. Frankly, and I'm not sure who's going to watch this, but I'll just speak my mind because that's how I am. Anyways, I think the worst thing the Army ever did was come up with that slogan, "An Army of One."
You're not the first person in the military I've ever heard
I'm
say
sure,
that.
because everything was teamwork and team oriented, and they really strived to work towards that before. The battle buddy system and the whole bit. And that Army of One just brought out kind of a selfish streak, and some of the young kids that were coming in that really didn't know any better. They really were just concerned about themselves and getting ahead, and really not helping out the rest of the bunch.
Do you feel that, for the most part, recruiters are honest with the people that they're signing up?
Yes, I do. If it was 20 years ago, my answer would have been totally different. But because of the standards that they need to keep, and because everything is paper oriented, if a recruiter tips the wrong way, someone is going to find out about it, and that recruiter is going to be in some deep stuff.
And from the inside, as far as when it's time to re-enlist or get out, what sort of pressure do you face internally?
Well, there's that. My mind still says I'm 20 years old, but my body says that I'm not. And I think the pressure that I feel internally is just that pressure I put in myself. I've always wanted to serve. Had I made a few better choices, I probably would have been on active duty and much better off on active duty. But since that wasn't my path, this has worked out very nicely for me. And I don't actually get any real pressure from the Army to re-up. I just know what the facts are, that we still need experienced people. I'm an experienced soldier, and if they still want me, as long as they don't get too fat and too slow, they'll continue to want me around, and I'll do what I can until it's really time for me to say, okay, I've had enough. I think I've done what I can do. And that being said, this is probably my last 6 years now.
How much time do you have left?
Well, I just actually re-upped for another 6 years. The Army did come knocking on my door during the summertime, because people in my specialty, they've got a lot of young kids that try to get into chaplain assisting that really aren't quite certain about what it's about. They think it's an easy job that they can just kind of sit around and get by, and it really isn't. You have to be people savvy. You have to have a lot of other experience under the belt. And when I had an opportunity to talk with Major General Hicks over in Kuwait, he's the former chief of chaplains, now retired. He's an absolutely fine man. And it was a sad day when he left the chaplain corps to retire. I kind of had hoped he'd stay on a little bit longer. And he was one of those guys that started at the bottom rung, too. So he had a great story to tell. My feeling is that chaplain assisting should be a job for a second enlistment soldier that has made some rank. minimum E5, and has some experience and maturity under their belt, because you're going to be in a lot of situations where you're talking about serious marriage issues, and I don't know how, but that there's too many 18-year-olds out there that have had had to deal with child rearing and marriage issues and divorce issues and suicide issues. Maybe a little bit more these days, but I don't personally know too many that have gotten that experience under their belt when they enter the military. So I kind of hope that the Chaplains Corps goes towards that and makes the job a little bit more conducive for the older soldier who's on a second enlistment minimum and has been around a little bit and knows the Army system somewhat more.
Now, you mentioned families. How has your family reacted to all of the time you spent in the military?
Well, they've been fine with it. They've absolutely been fine with it, yeah.
Have you been deployed since you've had your own family, or?
Yes, I was deployed in 2003, November 2003. I received my orders to go to Kuwait and Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom. And I felt very fortunate that all that time, that was about 18 years in, all that time, that's the only time that I've really been called upon by my country, other than a few, national issues or weather type issues in Massachusetts, really. I felt very fortunate that it was the only time I've ever had to do anything. And I was eager to go. It interrupted a career, but you do what you need to do.
What was it like explaining to your son that you were going to be gone?
Well, it was actually not that bad. His uncle is a Norwich University graduate and a colonel in the Air Force, so he's in full-time, and he's still in full-time as a colonel in the Air Force, and he's been used to that, and his grandfather was in the military, and he's seen me in a uniform since he was a baby, so it was no big deal, really. I just had to explain to him. Of course, he was older, too. He was 16 years old, which made it a lot easier. And I just said, well, you know what's going on, and this is what I need to do, and I'll see you in a year. And it's like any other 16-year-old. Sometimes it goes in one year and out the other. But he's good like that. And I think, and for a lot of kids, that's the way they cope. But we kept in close touch. I always had either email or telephone or satellite phone that was handy. So as much as I could call home, I did. So he was fine with it.
Has he expressed any interest one way or the other in being in the military?
No, and I'm glad that he has, and I told him that the rest of the family has done enough, and he has no obligation to join the military at all. And he said, thanks. and I think that's true. We've kind of done enough, and he's our only child. If he wanted to join, we'd certainly support him, but like I said, the rest of the family has done enough, and we've given enough, so he really doesn't have to at this point.
What sort of social changes have you seen in the country in general in the last, say, 15 years?
Social changes. It's. I think there's been more of a division of people. The middle is getting more and more thin as far as opinion goes. You're either going to have folks that are ultra left or ultra right, which I think is a very dangerous thing for our nation. Middle ground is always the best way to go, and it kind of brings sanity back into the conversation, more or less. And folks that are either ultra right, and I've seen them, and we've seen them in the military, and I've seen them in the civilian world, or same thing, ultra left. Being too extreme is not the way to be, unfortunately.
Leaving aside the last two elections, do you see either party actually maintaining any middle ground?
I see probably the Democratic Party, and I have to be a little careful because the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and so I won't express an opinion as far as that goes. But, it comes down to reality. We've never had an independent in the White House. We've had nobody, Ralph Nader was never going to make it, unfortunately.
Ross Perot.
Ross Perot. The two main parties are going to continue to go as they are, but I think folks have had, from what I've heard and from the from talk around the shop, so to speak, where I work and that, I think people are just interested in having a little bit of a change and seeing what the next guy can do or what the next girl can do. I think, I won't mention any particular candidates, but I think the Democrats are putting forth some interesting folks, and the Republicans have their work cut out for them.
Very interesting ground that I won't ask you to comment on because you are still under orders. If you could make one change to the nation's electoral process, what would it be?
I'd get rid of the Electoral College. There's absolutely no need for it. We have educated people that can make educated decisions. We don't need an Electoral College to direct a vote one way or another. And in some cases, it's directed it away from the popular vote of the people.
Do you think that there ever was a need for it, or was it paranoia?
No, I think there definitely was a need for it because of the educational standards as the country first became a nation. There was no uniformity in educational standards, and an educated voter is the best kind of voter that you have out there. If you can't read, you can't write, certainly go to the polls and vote, but you might just, become anybody's fool at that point, especially if the people giving you the information aren't giving you good information. So I think it's better for people to do their own research. So at a point in time, yeah, there was a great need for the Electoral College, but now there is none, and it should go away, in my humble opinion.
That's an opinion shared by many. I just don't actually see it happening anytime soon.
I think that's on our wish list.
Any group of people who you think shouldn't join the military?
Other than conscientious objectors, no. If you really feel that you want to contribute to your country, it's a great employment opportunity for a lot of folks, and it's a great training opportunity. It's a great way for anybody, any young person that's really kind of floundering around, but maybe has a little bit of a good head on their shoulders to get involved with. They just have to kind of pick where they decide to go, because the missions are different. I can't see that there's any group of people. I've worked with Muslim soldiers, I've worked with Buddhist soldiers, Jewish soldiers, people of every persuasion in the military, and I think it's a great place for people that can be team players and actually, depending on how much adventure you like and how much risk-taking you like, it's a great place to start your adult career.